Today we'll be discussing the Beatles' British invasion of America in 1964.
I have been investigating how the Beatles connected and resonated with the people of 1960s America. I'll be focusing on the rising demographic of teenagers, a market segment that had not truly existed until the mid to late 50s. After the Second World War, prosperity had meant people could live more comfortably, in turn taking the pressure off teens to go to work and earn a living. They had more time to study and could afford a personal income for luxury goods. The Beatles inadvertently cornered this US market. In 1964, the Beatles' Boeing 747 Pan Am Flight 101 landed in New York City at JFK Airport to scenes never seen before. No one knew how many people would turn out, but 5,000 fans, mainly young girls, crowded the upper balconies of the airport, indicating that the American youth saw the band as more important. From documentary footage I have investigated, I have found quotes from people at the time. It was like they were from another planet. It was fascinating that people would come to this, yet they wouldn't come to see the president. These quotes suggest the adults of the era struggled to see the appeal that teens do, who feel like they are being visited by aliens. I believe this was the first true emergence of the fangirl and Beatlemania stateside. Although it may have started with Elvis, it was really ignited with the Beatles. One fan said, "They're so cute, can they stay forever?" suggesting that their appearance also played a big part in the appeal to the new segment. Their different way of dressing and hairstyles is very new in America, so held a lot of fascination and appeal with teens. I found a music student at the time's interview tape. She was studying at Juilliard, focusing on Italian classical music, and said, "We don't usually like rock and roll, but we think they're just great." This suggests that the up-and-coming generation of musicians saw value in their music. Rock and roll was huge in the 50s, but teens of the early 60s would not have connected with it. The Beatles were inspired by skiffle bands and the 50s rock and roll, so their sound must have felt familiar, but also different and fresh enough for the teens to be connected by it. The band really brought a whole generation of teens in America together. This was huge at the time because television had not been around for very long, so viewing figures of that size were groundbreaking. To conclude, Beatlemania could only have had such a dominance over America because of how it united the teenagers of the time over a common ground and a common love for the band.
So what I'm going to be talking about is the reflection of social and commercial change through songs and lyrics from the Beatles. So to contextualise, the Beatles had risen to worldwide prominence in the break of 1964 with their catchy pop-driven songs from their first albums. Their first single to hit the charts was Love Me Do, which reached number 17 in 1962, underlining a clear popularity from the get-go. The debut record from the Beatles was Please Please Me and remained at number 1 for 30 weeks from its release in March 1963. The album itself was rush-released by their label Parlophone in order to capitalise on the success of the singles released prior. Beatlemania subsequently hit the USA in February 1964 by appearing on The Ed Sullivan Show, which wrapped up 73 million viewers, or 34% of the USA population at the time. The lyrics that can be heard in the song justify an easy listening, and so why they were popular. The repetition of love, love me do, you know I love, at the start of each verse implies this simple message, further justifying the easy listening that they strive to get from fans. The lyrics, "Come on and work it out, you know you twist little go, you know you twist so fine," suggests the broad theme of having a female relation in order for female audiences to have a common connection to the song. The main lyrical theme continued into their second album with the Beatles. The album was recorded 4 months after their debut album and was released in November 1963. The songs on the album still followed the theme of love and female relation. The track All My Loving was the song that got the most airplay from the album. It holds a strong implication to this continuing theme of love. And the lyrics in the chorus, "And then while I'm away, I'll write home every day, and I'll send all my loving to you," imply this simple message of love in order to captivate their target audience with the suggestion the lyrics target them. The songs on the album Please Please Me commonly follow an AABA structure, with others taking even simpler approaches. The tracks on the band's second album with the Beatles became slightly more complex, with a dedicated fan base being willing to listen to the band's expressing a more creative output. Unlike all the songs on Please Please Me, including an intro and codas. Prime examples of this include the song It Won't Be Long, starts with a chorus, and the song Not Second starting on a verse. Chord progression. The Beatles used the basis of roots, fourths and fifths for their songs, as well as including transitions with major or minor diatonics to set the key for most of their early material. This laid the foundation for their catchy material that gained the mass appeal to a mass audience. This inclusion of adding major and minor influences to the chord progressions added more emotional derivatives than what was coming from typical American popular music, which would simply follow a 1-4-5 or similar structure. This allowed the audience to have a more engaging time listening to the songs due to the theme of emotion setting. This in hand led to the Beatles having an average of 8.24 chords per song for the 46 songs released between 1962 and 1964. The song I Saw Her Standing There from the first album, Please Please Me, follows the progression of using 1-4-5 chords as well as adding sevenths. This creates character to the progression of the piece due to its simple structure, as well as adding colour with the extensions, creating a positive and engaging appeal for audiences to listen to the mood of the song. As well as this, a flat 5 chord is used to establish the I in the song. This would emphasise a sense of natural speech which engages well with an audience, would want to feel the connection as natural conversation. With the progress of more complex structure compared to songs in their first album, All My Lovin' from With the Beatles contains slightly more complex progressions. The use of dominant sevenths in the 5th chord alongside the remaining triad bass chords. Just like the previous example, the song uses a flat 7th chord to emphasise true in the lyrics. As well as this, songs that the Beatles wrote included a fixed beat on the backbeat, which strayed away from the swan feel of other popular music at the time. This appealed to audiences listening because it added more intensity to the sound of the songs, and so it added more sense of engagement to listen to the music.
Technology made a big change to the Beatles' first US tour. The first big change was just beforehand, when they were able to record their third album on a 4-track recorder. Previously, the standard for pop music was a 2-track recorder. This meant that drums and bass were usually recorded on 1 track, and then guitars and vocals. You couldn't really re-record without deleting the previous take. So if you had a good take, you couldn't save it and keep on going to see if you got a better one, and it could be quite difficult to do, and you couldn't have too many layers with instruments. Whereas with 4-track, you could add more layers, you could do overdubs, and you could re-record parts to get a better take. This made a big difference in the quality of the record and the way they were able to push the musical boundaries at the time for pop music. I think that this really increased popularity because they were releasing pop music that I think was slightly different to what had been released before because of this. I think the second big change to technology was actually the guitars, because in the early 50s, Leo Fender had released the first solid-body electric guitar. This allowed guitars to be played at not only a higher volume, but be amplified much cleaner, and Beatles played electric guitars with this pickup technology in them on their first US tour. They staged as half as big as they could because they could only really use acoustic instruments, and amplified acoustic instruments had problems with feedback, whereas the newer instruments didn't feed back as much and were much cleaner. The amplifiers at the time were still a problem, as they still were using 20, 25, maybe 30 watt amplifiers, 50 at a maximum, and these really weren't loud enough for the venues they were performing in all the time, and bigger amplifiers just hadn't been invented yet. Unfortunately, they were invented later by Jim Marshall, but the solid body electric guitar made a big difference because it allowed them to play louder and to bigger audiences, which allowed them to reach a larger audience of people and allowed them to share the music by word of mouth and experience much, much faster.
To conclude, I do not believe that the Beatles would have been as successful as they were if they did not unite and corner the up-and-coming teenage market segment. Their success was directly tied to the community of fans that grew up with them. The Beatles needed new technology to deliver the performance they required, both on CD with 4-track recordings and Love with the technology and advancements in guitar technology turning up the volume. The simple messages about love in the songs by the Beatles is what made them so appealing to their target audiences. Along with this was their catchy method of songwriting, which captivated wider audiences of any age.